I'd like to share with you all quickly as we come to the conclusion of the state's case against the defendant Johnson & Johnson and Janssen. We were not being hyperbolic when we have made the suggestion to the court that Johnson & Johnson Janssen represents the kingpin of the opioid epidemic in our state. The epidemic has created a generation of addicts and has killed thousands of Oklahomans. The latest accurate number we have is over 6,700. We're probably at 7,000 at this point. So let me share some key points with you that I think our case has demonstrated to the judge based on the evidence. It is clear that wholly owned subsidiaries of the defendant, Naramco and Tasmanian Analgesics, provided almost 60% of the active pharmaceutical ingredient for opioid analgesics to manufacturers in this country during most of the period that we're looking at. We've demonstrated that the defendant engaged in shadowy collaborations and conspiracies with other opioid manufacturers to educate, is the word they like to use, I prefer brainwash, prescribers with pseudoscience and false studies, and to suborn policymakers from addressing the epidemic in a decisive way. They've marketed, our evidence has shown, highly addictive opioids as safe with a low rate of addiction whenever their internal medical advisory board advised them not to do so. We've also shown that they have targeted, our evidence provided to the judge has shown that they targeted in diabolical ways children, veterans, and women with regard to getting them focused on opioids as a solution to their pain needs. So we've also, and it's not been disputed, we've also shown that during 2017, on the issue of oversupply, every man, woman, and child in Oklahoma received, or could have received 156 tablets, 10 milligram tablets during 2017. Maybe the most breathtaking thing that I've heard in this case has been the cross-examination of Commissioner White, in which there were questions that were attempted to get Commissioner White to accept on behalf of the 4 million people in this state that the state of Oklahoma bears responsibility for this epidemic. So one of the things I want to make sure everybody sees is this demonstrative, and this isn't something that we've concocted. This is an elaborate strategy the defendant utilized to influence, educate, and as far as I'm concerned, brainwash every possible policy-making entity in the state and in federal government. So these questions that attempt to accuse the state for not being responsible enough are, just in a word, insulting. You know, just because, as Commissioner White said, we didn't build bomb shelters fast enough, we didn't provide enough people bulletproof vests for what she analogized as bullets that are and bombs being sent into the state, does not impose any responsibility on the state of Oklahoma or its citizens. And just because we weren't wily or suspicious or cynical enough to recognize what was going on is no excuse for them to pass responsibility. Moreover, the questions that suggest that taxpayers, that these programs that are being partially funded ought to be the basis for limiting their liability, are also insulting to me as the chief law officer of the state. One other demonstrative that I'd like to share with you, so at the end of the day, here's a chart that shows supply and deaths. And the legalese that you've heard that you can't correlate, or that you can't mix up correlation with causation, it's very simple. When you go to bed at night and there's no snow on the ground, you wake up in the morning and there's snow on the ground, it snowed. So this is causation, it's not correlation. And we didn't hear a single word from Johnson during this case where they've attempted to explain why, given these death rates in Oklahoma and the rest of the country, why there wasn't any corporate discussion, why there wasn't any effort to recognize what was going on in the country and to try to curtail their sales activities. So we feel very good with regard to what we've provided the judge. We're confident in our case. I can't say enough about the great team, the great legal team, and all the support that we've deployed on behalf of the state. I don't want to be disrespectful to the judge, but I wanted to take some time to share with you some of my thoughts about the case, and I'll answer just a few questions.
Once you're wrapped up today, who can we expect to hear from first from the defense?
Well, we'll take those witnesses as they bring them to us. Again, our team is prepared to cross-examine these witnesses. We don't expect to hear anything that's inconsistent with the evidence we provided the judge.
Mike, they have emphatically just denied any wrongdoings, and then today they tried to, I guess, get the commissioner to, say, is Oklahoma even 1% responsible? When they were asking that question, what was going through your mind?
Well, I was counting to 10, in a word, not to trivialize what was said. We're confident that on behalf of the state, we've provided the judge with what we intended to provide him, what we think is irrefutable evidence with regard to the responsibility of this defendant for the epidemic in the state. And whatever it costs, this defendant needs to provide that cost and take responsibility for the mess that it's created.